What happens when Duke and the students of Class 1A are suddenly transported into the world of Sonic the Hedgehog? Stranded on a war-torn Mobius, they quickly discover that this isn't a training exercise. Dr. Robotnik's army is hunting them, and the freedom fighters are desperately trying to survive. But when Duke's military experience, Class 1A's quirks, and Sonic's incredible speed come together, a new alliance is born. Can they stop Robotnik and help free Mobius before it's too late? Get ready for an action-packed crossover where heroes from two worlds join forces. The sky over Mobius did not merely break, it hemorrhaged. A violent, jagged rift of violet energy tore through the ozone above the great forest, screaming with the sound of grinding tectonic plates and digital feedback. From the swirling vortex of the interdimensional slipstream, two distinct groups of strangers were spat out into the canopy of ancient, mutated oaks. The first was a lone man in tactical fatigues, his boots hitting the loam with the practiced roll of a paratrooper. Duke, field commander of G.I. Joe, came up with his pulse rifle leveled, his eyes scanning for Cobra Vipers even as he realized the air smelled less like a battlefield and more like an industrial oil spill choked by dying pine. Nearby, a chaotic tumble of color and adolescent shouts followed. 20 students in varying states of hero costume disarray crashed through the branches. Izuku Midoriya caught himself with a burst of emerald sparks, while Katsuki Bakugo blasted the air to stabilize his descent, his face already twisted into a mask of habitual fury. They were a world away from the UA training grounds, standing in a forest where the trees seemed to groan under the weight of metal growths. Before the disorientation could pass, the mechanical hum began. It was a rhythmic, soulless thrumming that vibrated in the marrow of their bones. From the shadows of the thickets emerged the Swat-Bots, lumbering, chrome-plated nightmares with glowing red optic sensors. They didn't offer a surrender. They simply raised their forearm cannons. Duke didn't hesitate. He dived behind a moss-covered log, his rifle barking in 3-round bursts that sparked harmlessly off the reinforced plating of the lead bot. "Form up!" Duke roared, his voice carrying the authority of a decade of combat. "Defensive perimeter! If you've got powers, use them now!" Midoriya didn't need the prompt. He saw the cold, calculated movement of the machines and recognized them instantly as high-threat automatons. "Class 1A, Defensive Formation Delta," he shouted, his voice cracking but firm. "Todoroki, left flank. Bakugo, clear the center." If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. The cycle continues. The forest floor erupted into a symphony of elemental violence. Shoto Todoroki slammed his right foot down, sending a jagged glacier of ice screaming through the undergrowth, flash freezing a dozen Swat-Bots into brittle statues. Bakugo leaped over the ice, his palms detonating with the force of howitzers, shearing the heads off the lead scouts. But for every machine they dismantled, 3 more hummed out of the dark. These weren't the fragile practice bots of UA. They were the mass-produced enforcement of a global tyrant, built to withstand the chaotic rebellion of a planet. Duke moved like a ghost through the periphery, his combat knife sinking into the neck joints of the machines that got too close to the students. He watched the kids with a narrowed, tactical gaze. They were powerful, yes, some of the most incredible assets he had ever seen, but they were fighting like it was a tournament. They weren't fighting like it was a war. "They're just keeping us busy," Duke yelled over the roar of Bakugo's explosions. "They're ranging us." Look at the sky. Above the tree line, a massive egg-shaped carrier ship descended, its belly opening to reveal a roboticizer beam, a swirling vortex of transmutation energy designed to turn organic flesh into compliant circuitry. The students looked up in horror as the air began to hum with a sickening, metallic ozone. "Get back!" Midoriya yelled, reaching for Uraraka as the gravity in the clearing began to shift. Then, the world turned blue. A streak of light, faster than any speed-based quirk Midoriya had ever recorded, blurred through the clearing. It wasn't just fast, it was kinetic. The blue blur struck the lead Swat-Bots like a cannonball, shattering them into scrap metal in a single, continuous loop. Within seconds, the 50-plus machines surrounding the group were nothing but smoking piles of junk. The streak stopped, resolving into a small blue hedgehog wearing red sneakers and a smirk that held more defiance than a Spartan army. "Whoa, easy there. Tall, dark, and tactical. the hedgehog said, flicking a piece of robot debris off his shoulder. He looked at Duke, then at the colorful array of Class 1A. And here I thought Robotnik was finally running out of ideas for weird-looking henchmen. You guys are a little too fleshy for his usual taste. Before Bakugo could retort with an explosion to the hedgehog's face, a second figure dropped from the trees. This was a ground squirrel in a blue vest, carrying a high-tech wrist computer that glowed with a soft blue light. Princess Sally Acorn didn't look at the strangers with amusement. She looked at them with the weary, calculating eyes of a resistance leader who had seen too much. "Sonic, stand down," Sally commanded. They fought the Swat-Bots. Robotnik's toys don't shoot their own. She turned to Duke, noting the G.I. Joe insignia and the disciplined way he held his weapon. Then she looked at Midoriya, whose costume was torn and whose eyes were wide with analytical wonder. "I'm Sally Acorn of the Freedom Fighters. You're in the Great Forest, and unless you want to be turned into a toaster by the ship hovering over your heads, I suggest you follow us. Now." Duke lowered his rifle, but he didn't holster it. He looked at the blue hedgehog, who was currently tapping his foot with a speed that defied physics, then at the students of Class 1A, who were looking to him for guidance. He recognized the look in Sally's eyes. It was the look of a commander who was losing a war. "Name's Duke," he said shortly. "These are the students of UA High. We don't know how we got here, but we know how to fight. If your enemy is the one who sent these tin cans, then we have a common interest." "Music to my ears, Joe," Sonic chirped, spinning his arm in a circle. "But we gotta move. Old Robotnik doesn't like it when people break his toys, and he's probably already sending the heavy hitters." As the group began to retreat into the deeper, hidden paths of the forest, Midoriya walked beside Duke, his notebook already out, his pen flying across the page. "Duke-san, did you see his velocity? It wasn't just a physical enhancement. He seemed to be manipulating the air resistance around his body. And that girl, her technology, it's unlike anything Hatsume has shown us. This world, it's not just another city. It's a graveyard." Duke looked at the blackened stumps of trees that had been stripped of their bark to feed Robotnik's furnaces. He saw the smog-choked horizon where the metallic spires of Robotropolis pierced the sky like poisoned needles. "It's a war zone, kid," Duke muttered, his voice grim. "And in a war zone, the first thing you lose isn't your life. It's your hope. Keep your eyes open. These freedom fighters are the only thing between this planet and total extinction." The group vanished into the foliage just as a second wave of Swat-Bots landed, their red eyes searching the empty clearing. Above, in the darkened bridge of his carrier, a man with a bloated mechanical body and a mustache like a jagged red scar watched the thermal signatures on his screen. Dr. Robotnik smiled, a cold, wet sound. "Evolutionary anomalies," Robotnik whispered, his metallic hand clenching into a fist. "Biological quirks. Oh, snivelly. I think we've found the perfect components for the next generation of my badniks. Bring me the one with the explosions. I want to see if his soul burns as bright as his temper." Knothole was not a fortress of stone and steel, but a sanctuary of roots and shadows. To the students of Class 1A, it felt like a subterranean village from a fairy tale, carved into the massive, hollowed-out base of an ancient sequoia. To Duke, it looked like a logistical nightmare. There were no sentry posts with interlocking fields of fire, no clear evacuation routes, and the soldiers were a collection of colorful animals who looked more like mascots than a resistance force. He kept his pulse rifle at the low ready, his eyes scanning the narrow tunnels as Sonic led them deeper into the heart of the hidden village. The arrival of 20 humans and a heavily armed soldier caused a stir among the refugees. Small, trembling Mobian children, rabbits, mice, and birds, clutched their parents' fur as the giants passed. Midoriya felt a pang of guilt. He was a hero in training, someone meant to inspire comfort, but here he was a frightening anomaly. His gaze drifted to a figure standing near a central hub of monitors. It was a rabbit, but her lower body and left arm were composed of cold, industrial hydraulics and gleaming chrome. "Bunny Rabbit," Sally introduced softly, noticing the students' shocked stares. "She was caught in a raid. We managed to pull her out of the roboticizer mid-sequence, but the damage was done. She's one of the lucky ones." The reality of the world hit Class 1A like a physical blow. Uraraka gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, while Ida stood rigid, his engines sputtering in a low, somber hum. This wasn't a villain attack they could simply arrest someone for. This was a systemic erasure of life. Bakugo stayed silent. His eyes narrowed at Bunny's mechanical limbs, his usual explosive bravado replaced by a simmering, focused heat. "I don't like the look in your eyes, Sugar," Bunny said, her voice a warm, southern drawl that contrasted sharply with her metal chassis. "I ain't a science project. I'm a freedom fighter. We're not looking for a fight with you." Duke stepped forward, addressing Sally as she pulled up a holographic map of the planet on her wrist computer. "Nicole, but we need to talk about your security. You've got a massive signature coming from this tree. If I can see the heat bleed from the surface, Robotnik satellites can definitely see it." Sally's ears flicked back, a sign of mounting irritation. "We've survived here for years, Commander. Our heat bleed is masked by a dampening field generated by rotor. We're ghosts in the machine." "Ghosts get caught," Duke countered, his voice hard. "I've seen resistance cells like this from the Amazon to the Balkans. You're playing a game of hide-and-seek with a man who owns the playground. You need a centralized command structure, perimeter sensors, and a clear tactical objective. Right now, you're just waiting to die." Sonic skated between them, his arms crossed. "Whoa, take a breath, Sarge. Sal's the brain, I'm the feet. It works. We hit the factories. We bust out some buddies. We're back before the scrap metal gets its oil changed. We don't need a drill sergeant telling us how to march." "You aren't marching, you're scavenging," Duke said, leaning into Sonic's space. "And these kids? They aren't your reinforcements. They're students. They need a plan, not a blue blur lifestyle." While the leaders clashed, Midoriya had drifted toward a cluttered workbench where a walrus in a yellow cap was tinkering with a strange, glowing gemstone. Beside him stood a small, two-tailed fox who was staring at a tablet with more processing power than anything in the UA labs. "The energy output is incredible," the fox, Tails, muttered. "It's not electrical, it's spiritual? No, that's not right. It's called a quirk," Midoriya said, kneeling beside him and offering his notebook. "Specifically, it's one for all. But I was looking at your power source. Those power rings? They seem to bridge the gap between biological energy and mechanical work." Tails looked up, his eyes bright with curiosity. "You're the one who was glowing green?" "I'm Tails. This is Rotor. And yeah, the rings are a manifestation of the planet's chaos energy. But your quirk? It's like your body is a capacitor. If we could figure out how to sync your output with our tech, we could blow Robotropolis off the map," Rotor finished, looking at Momo Yaoyorozu, who was currently manifesting a series of high-grade sensors for the group to study. "Your girl here, she's a walking factory. If she can produce the alloys I need for our shielding, we could actually take the fight to the city instead of just nipping at the heels of the Swat-Bots." The tension in the room was palpable. It was a collision of philosophies. Duke saw a war that needed to be won with discipline and sacrifice. Sally saw a family that needed to be protected with cunning and care. Sonic saw a thrill that needed to be chased. And Class 1A? They saw a nightmare they were duty-bound to end. "Listen to me," Sally said, her voice dropping to a whisper that commanded more attention than a shout. "Robotnik doesn't just want to rule us. He wants to be us. He hates the chaos of life, the unpredictability of it. Every time we save one person, he builds 10 more machines. We aren't a regular army, Duke. We're the last heartbeat of a dying world. If we fight your way, we lose what makes us worth saving." Duke looked around the room, at the scared children, the half-metal rabbit, the genius fox, and the hero students who were already forming bonds with them. He sighed, holstering his rifle. "Fine. We do it your way for the recon. But if things go south, my rules apply. We don't leave anyone behind, and we don't stop until the target is neutralized." "Deal," Sally said. Suddenly, the monitors on the wall flickered to life, showing a grainy, red-tinted feed from the Great Forest perimeter. A massive, four-legged walker, a combot, was tearing through the ancient oaks, its laser sight searching the ground. But it wasn't alone. Walking beside it was a figure that made the students' blood run cold. It was a machine, but its silhouette was unmistakable. It had a spiked, blonde mane of metallic hair and grenade-shaped gauntlets on its forearms. "Is that me?" Bakugo snarled, his palms sparking with a terrifying muffled intensity. "A mecha quirk," Midoriya whispered, horror dawning on him. "He didn't just capture our data, he's already started the transition. He's making hero-based badniks." "Sonic," Sally snapped. "Take the strike team. Duke, you wanted a tactical objective? Stop that thing before it finds the entrance to the village. If it gets a lock on Knothole, it's over. Duke didn't wait for a second command. Class 1A, gear up. Todoroki, Ida, Bakugo, you're with the hedgehog. The rest of you, establish a secondary line at the tunnel mouth. We're going to show this scrap heap why you don't mess with a Spartan or a hero. Sonic didn't even wait for the door to open. He curled into a ball and smashed through the overhead hatch, a blue streak of defiance against the encroaching dark. Catch up if you can, Sarge, Sonic's voice echoed back. Duke looked at Bakugo, whose face was a mask of cold, murderous intent, as he stared at the mechanical mockery of himself. Don't let it get in your head, kid, Duke warned. It's just a machine, and machines can be broken. I'm not gonna break it, Bakugo spat, his eyes glowing with the reflection of his own explosions. I'm gonna melt it into a paperweight. The great forest was a graveyard of giants, where the skeletal remains of ancient oaks stood as silent witnesses to the mechanical rot consuming the world. Sonic was a sapphire smear against the dull gray of the morning mist, his speed creating a vacuum that sucked the falling ash into his wake. Behind him, Tenya Ida pushed his engines to their limit, his exhaust ports glowing a furious blue as he struggled to match the hedgehog's impossible pace. Above them, Bakugo used his explosions to surf the shockwaves of his own making, his eyes locked on the metallic doppelganger tearing through the tree line. The Mecha Bakugo wasn't just a statue. It moved with a jerky, pre-programmed malice, its arm cannons charging with a high-pitched whine that mimicked the sound of nitroglycerin sweat igniting. Spread out! Duke's voice crackled over the short-range comms he distributed to the team. He was moving through the canopy on a grappling line, his pulse rifle spitting fire at the combat walker's joints. Todoroki, create a containment zone. Don't let that walker reach the ridge. Shoto Todoroki landed on a blackened branch, his left side erupting in a curtain of flame to ward off a swarm of B-bots before his right side surged. A wall of ice, 50 feet high and twice as thick, slammed into the forest floor, cutting off the combot's path. The walker's laser array swiveled, melting through the frost in seconds, but the distraction was enough. Duke dropped from the trees, planting a thermal charge on the walker's sensor pod before kicking off and detonating it mid-air. The machine staggered, blinded, its massive legs crushing the frozen ground. Meanwhile, Bakugo had reached his target. He slammed into the Mecha Bakugo mid-air, a localized explosion erupting between them. You think some scrap metal imitation can handle the heat? Bakugo roared, his palms vibrating. He unleashed a stun grenade flash, blinding the machine's optic sensors, but the bot didn't flinch. It calculated. In a fraction of a second, the machine's forearm rotated, firing a pressurized blast of compressed air and shrapnel that caught Bakugo in the shoulder, sending him spinning toward the earth. Sonic caught him before he hit the ground, a blue blur that decelerated just enough to drop Bakugo safely onto a mossy bank. Hey Sparky, maybe try a little less shouting and a little more dodging, Sonic quipped, though his eyes remained sharp. That thing isn't just mimicking you, it's reading your heart rate. It's a computer, and right now, you're an easy math problem. Shut up, Bakugo snarled, pushing himself up. His teeth gritted against the pain in his arm. I don't need a lecture from a cartoon. He's right, Bakugo, Midoriya shouted, swinging into the fray with one for all. Full cowl, shoot style. He delivered a kick to the Mecha Bakugo's chassis, his boots reinforced by the specialized iron soles Hatsume had crafted, but the machine's armor was made of an alloy that absorbed the kinetic energy. It's using the same logic as the Swat-Bots, but with a refined quirk emulation layer. It's anticipating the arc of our attacks based on our biological signatures. Duke landed beside them, his rifle humming as it cooled. He looked at the chaos, the burning forest, the students struggling against a single elite unit, and the towering chemical plant looming on the horizon like a temple of industry. We're being baited, Duke realized, his tactical mind clicking into place. This isn't an assassination attempt. It's a stress test. Robotnik is gathering combat data on your quirks so he can mass-produce these things. Then we change the variables, Sally's voice came through the comms. She was miles away in Knothole, but her eyes were on the satellite feed. Commander, the chemical plant is the source of the regional uplink. If you can breach the facility, we can upload a virus to corrupt the data stream. But you have to do it now, before that mecha unit uploads its final report. Duke looked at Sonic. Can you get a breach team inside? Sonic smirked, his thumb pointing to his chest. I can have him in the break room before the coffee's cold. But someone's got to keep the big guy busy. He nodded toward the combot, which had recovered and was now leveling its main cannon at the group. We'll handle the walker, Midoriya said, stepping forward. He looked at his classmates, Todoroki, Uraraka, and Kirishima. Class 1A, we're the shield. Duke, Sonic, Bakugo, you're the spear. Take that plant down. The transition was seamless, a testament to Duke's earlier drilling. While Class 1A engaged the walker with a coordinated assault of gravity manipulation and elemental barrages, Sonic grabbed Duke by the harness and Bakugo by the collar. With a sonic boom that shattered the remaining glass in the nearby forest, they were gone. The chemical plant zone was a labyrinth of neon-pink chemicals, spinning gears, and toxic fumes. It was the heart of Robotnik's industrial empire in this sector. As they approached the perimeter, Duke saw the sheer scale of the automated defenses. Turrets lined every walkway, and the air was thick with the scent of sulfur and ozone. "Breach on my mark!" Duke yelled over the wind. "Bakugo, give us a hole! Sonic, clear the internal corridor!" Bakugo didn't answer with words. He unleashed an AP shot, a concentrated beam of fire that punched through the reinforced steel gates of the facility. As the metal slagged, Sonic shot through the gap like a bullet, a whirlwind of blue destruction that dismantled the internal security turrets before they could even rotate. Duke followed, his pulse rifle clearing the corners with lethal efficiency, his movements a blur of tactical precision. They reached the central hub, a massive, transparent vat filled with a swirling, iridescent liquid. To Duke, it looked like fuel. To Bakugo, it looked like a target. But to Sonic, who stopped dead in his tracks, it looked like a nightmare. Floating inside the vat were hundreds of tiny, translucent pods. Inside each pod was a flicky, a small bird indigenous to Mobius, but they were being drained of their life force through a series of glowing needles. The energy was being siphoned into a central processor, where a digital map of a human nervous system, Midoriya's, was being mapped. "He's not just building robots," Duke whispered, his jaw tightening. "He's using the life force of this planet to power a simulation of your quirks. He's refining the roboticization process to include meta abilities." "This is sick," Bakugo muttered, his usual anger replaced by a cold, vibrating loathing. He raised his palms toward the vat. "I'm blowing this whole place to hell." "Wait!" Sonic shouted, his usual cockiness gone. "If you blow the vat, the biofeedback will kill the flickies. We have to disconnect them manually." "We don't have time." Duke checked his tactical display. "The Mecha Bakugo is 5 minutes out, and it's bringing a legion with it. We shut this down now, or we lose the war." The dilemma was the heart of the conflict between their worlds. Duke was prepared to make the hard sacrifice to stop a global threat. Sonic couldn't bear to lose a single soul. And Bakugo? Bakugo was caught between the soldier he was becoming and the hero he wanted to be. "Move over, Blue," Bakugo spat, stepping toward the console. He didn't fire an explosion. Instead, he placed his hands on the metal casing, his palms sweating not with the intent to destroy, but with a controlled, simmering heat. He began to vibrate the casing at a specific frequency, one he'd learned during his remedial training for precision control. "I'll melt the locks. You get the birds out. Soldier boy, keep the door clear. We're doing this the hard way." Duke looked at the boy, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Understood," holding the line. He turned back toward the entrance, just as the alarm klaxons began to wail, and the heavy thud of mechanical feet echoed through the hallways. The war had just gotten personal. The chemical plant was a symphony of industrial rot and neon-drenched violence. Inside the hub, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and the high-pitched whine of siphoned souls. Duke stood at the primary blast door, his pulse rifle braced against his shoulder, spitting rhythmic bursts of azure light into the corridor. He was down to his last 3 power cells, and the sea of Swat-Bots was endless. They didn't scream when they died. They simply sparked, collapsed, and were trampled by the next wave of chrome-plated malice. Duke's tactical display was a mess of red icons, but his mind remained a cold, calculating machine. He was measuring the distance, the timing of the reloads, and the rising temperature of the facility. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was the dam, holding back a flood of extinction. Behind him, Bakugo was a study in trembling focus. Sweat beaded on his forehead, not from exertion, but from the agonizing restraint required to melt the intricate biolocks without triggering a catastrophic feedback loop. His hands were pressed against the base of the flicky vat, emitting a low, constant hum of thermal energy. "Hurry up, Blue," Bakugo snarled, his voice strained. "I can't hold this frequency forever. The casing is starting to liquefy." Sonic was a blur of motion, his gloved hands moving faster than the eye could follow as he disconnected the glowing needles from the tiny, frightened birds. "Almost there. Sparky." Sonic chirped, though the usual playfulness was replaced by a desperate edge. "Just 10 more. Come on, little guys, stay with me." As each flicky was freed, it fluttered into a containment unit Sally had designed. A small, portable sanctuary, meant to mask their life signs from Robotnik's sensors. Suddenly, the floor beneath them shuddered. A holographic projection shimmered into existence in the center of the room. It was a face they had seen on the monitors, but in high definition, the sheer, bloated arrogance of Dr. Robotnik was overwhelming. His eyes were hidden behind twin pools of red light, and his smile was a jagged tear across his face. "Commander Hauser," Robotnik's voice boomed, dripping with a wet, oily satisfaction. "I must thank you. Truly. I had projected a 30% chance that your heroic instincts would lead you to this facility. You've exceeded my expectations. While you play the savior for a few handfuls of feathers, you've left your flank wide open." Duke's blood turned to ice. "Nicole, status of the forest team. Now." The comms crackled with static, the voice of Denki Kaminari cutting through the noise. "Duke, we're getting hammered. These aren't just Swat-Bots. They've got some kind of magnetic dampener. My electricity is being sucked right out of..." The sound of a metallic impact and a sharp, pained cry echoed through the hub. "Kaminari!" Midoriya's voice joined the fray, frantic and winded. "Duke, we're separated. A specialized unit. It looks like a giant, flying claw. It's singled him out. It's moving too fast for the ice walls." "The spark plug, I believe you call him," Robotnik chuckled, the sound echoing through the chemical plant's vents. "A fascinating biological battery. His quirk operates on a frequency that is remarkably easy to harvest once the host's nervous system is stabilized. I have been looking for a consistent power source for my mecha hero line. Thank you for delivering him to my doorstep. You bloated sack of scrap." Bakugo roared, his restraint finally snapping. He didn't melt the lock, he blasted it. The resulting explosion shattered the base of the vat, sending iridescent liquid and the final few flickies spilling across the floor. Sonic scooped up the birds in a mid-air somersault, but the damage was done. The alarm klaxons shifted from a warning to a death knell. "The facility is on a 10-minute self-destruct," Sally's voice screamed over the comms. "Robotnik is scuttling the plant to bury you and the data. You have to get out of there. We're not leaving Kaminari." Midoriya's voice was fading, drowned out by the roar of a jet engine on his end. "He's being pulled toward the northern sector. We're giving chase, but the walker is blocking." "Duke, listen to me," Sonic said, his feet already beginning to spin in place, creating a localized cyclone. "I can get us to the forest team in 30 seconds, but the plant's explosion will level the tree line if we don't finish the virus upload. Someone has to stay and ensure the uplink completes." Duke looked at the terminal, where the progress bar for Sally's virus sat at 88%. It was a death sentence. To stay was to be vaporized by the chemical fires. To leave was to allow Robotnik to keep the data he'd harvested from their battle. Data that would allow him to build an army of roboticized students. "Go," Duke said, his voice flat and devoid of hesitation. He didn't look at the hedgehog. He looked at the door. "Get Bakugo out of here. Get to the kids. If Kaminari is taken, this war ends before it begins. I'll see the upload through." "The hell you are, soldier boy." Bakugo stepped forward, his eyes blazing. "You're just a guy with a pea shooter. I'm the one who wins. I stay." Duke grabbed Bakugo by the front of his hero costume, his face inches from the boys. "Listen to me, Bakugo. You're a hero. That means you're an asset. Right now your power is needed to break that walker and save your classmate. My job is to hold the ground. That's what a soldier does. He holds the line so the heroes can do the impossible." Duke shoved him toward Sonic. "That's an order, son. Now move." Sonic looked at Duke, a profound, silent respect passing between the two warriors, the rebel and the soldier. Sonic didn't argue. He knew the math. He grabbed Bakugo, who was still snarling in protest, and vanished in a sonic boom that blew out the remaining glass in the hub. Duke was alone in the screaming heart of the dying plant. He turned to the terminal, his rifle discarded. He pulled a heavy combat pistol from his thigh holster and checked the magazine. 94%, he whispered. The blast doors hissed open. Not Swat-Bots this time. Was the Mecha Bakugo, its metallic skin scorched from their previous encounter, its eyes glowing with a hateful crimson light. It didn't fire. It walked toward him, its servomotors growling. "You're a persistent piece of junk," Duke muttered, leveling his pistol at the machine's optic sensor. "But you've got one flaw. You were built to fight heroes. You don't know how to fight a man who has nothing left to lose." The machine lunged. Duke dived beneath its reach, slamming a final thermal detonator into its knee joint. As the explosion buckled the machine, Duke looked at the screen. Uplink complete. Virus deployed. The facility groaned, the first of the chemical vats detonating in the lower levels. The floor tilted violently. Duke didn't run for the exit. He ran for the manual override of the flicky transport tubes, smashing the glass and pulling a hidden lever. "At least the birds get out," he grunted, as the emergency pods launched into the sky, away from the blast zone. As the ceiling began to collapse, Duke closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, picturing the G.I. Joe headquarters, the faces of Flint and Scarlet. Then, he opened them, the fire reflecting in his pupils. He wasn't dead yet. Outside, miles away, the great forest erupted. A pillar of toxic pink fire mushroomed into the sky, the shockwave flattening trees for kilometers. Midoriya and the rest of Class 1A watched from the ridge, their hearts sinking. But their grief was cut short by the sight of a black, egg-shaped pod screaming into the clouds, a trail of yellow sparks following it. "Kaminari!" Uraraka screamed, reaching out as the pod vanished into the smog-choked atmosphere, toward the distant, shimmering spires of Robotropolis. Robotnik had his prize. The spark of Class 1A was gone. The students stood in the ashfall, the silence of the forest broken only by the distant, rhythmic thud of the combat walker approaching their position. They were alone. Their commander was gone in the blast, and their friend was a prisoner of the most sadistic mind on the planet. Midoriya clenched his fists, the green lightning of One for All flickering violently around his body, his tears carving tracks through the soot on his face. "He's not just a prisoner," Midoriya whispered, his voice shaking with a cold, terrifying resolve. "He's a hero, and we're going to get him back, even if we have to tear that city down brick by brick." But as the smoke cleared, a single, battered figure emerged from the edge of the blast radius, supported by a blue blur. Duke was charred, his fatigues torn to rags, his arm hanging limp at his side, but his eyes were still fixed on the horizon. "Don't start the funeral yet, kid," Duke rasped as Sonic set him down. "We've got a city to burn." The silence of Knothole was heavier than the explosion that had leveled the chemical plant. In the dim, amber light of the subterranean hub, the students of Class 1A sat in fragmented groups, their vibrant hero costumes muted by layers of soot and ash. Denki Kaminari's empty seat, a mossy stump near the central monitor, felt like a physical wound in the room. In the medical bay, Duke sat shirtless while a mechanical arm, operated by a grim-faced rotor walrus, stitched a jagged gash across his ribs. The commander didn't flinch. His eyes were fixed on a grainy holographic map of Robotropolis, the sprawling metallic cancer that covered half the continent. "You need to rest, Commander," Sally Acorn said, her voice soft but laden with the weight of her own losses. "The blast should have killed you. If Sonic hadn't reached you in that millisecond. The blast didn't kill me because I had a job to do," Duke rasped, his voice sounding like grinding gravel. He pushed the medical arm away and stood, wincing as the fresh stitches pulled at his skin. He grabbed his shredded tactical vest and pulled it back on. "And my job isn't finished until that kid is back on this side of the wire. Those students of yours, Sally, they're falling apart." He stepped out into the main common area. The atmosphere was brittle. Ida was staring at his boots, his engines clicking with a rhythmic, anxious metallic sound. Uraraka was weeping silently, her hand resting on Kaminari's discarded goggles. Even Bakugo was uncharacteristically still, leaning against a support root, his palms smoking with a low, acrid heat that smelled of bitter almonds and frustration. "Listen up!" Duke's voice cracked through the room like a whip. The students jumped, their heads snapping toward the scarred soldier. "Look at yourselves. You look like a defeated army, and you haven't even seen the front lines yet. How can you say that? Midoriya stood up, his green eyes shimmering with a mix of grief and burgeoning anger. Kaminari-kun is gone. He's being experimented on. We failed him. We were supposed to be heroes, but we couldn't even protect one of our own. Duke walked right into Midoriya's space, his towering frame casting a long shadow over the boy. You think being a hero is about having a perfect record? You think Plus Ultra means you never lose a man? In my world, we don't have quirks. We don't have magical hedgehogs or ancient prophecies. We have the person to our left and the person to our right. And sometimes, the person to our right doesn't come home. That's not acceptable, Ida shouted, standing up, his glasses reflecting the harsh light of the monitors. As class rep, I should have coordinated the defense better. We followed your tactical advice, and it led to a capture. No, Duke corrected, his voice dropping to a dangerous low frequency. You followed your instincts. You fought like you were in a training exercise with safety nets. You stopped to check on each other mid-combat. You hesitated to use lethal force against machines that are literally designed to harvest your souls. Robotnik isn't a villain like the ones you face back home. He's a global extinction event. He doesn't want to conquer you. He wants to process you. Duke turned to the whole class, his gaze sweeping over them. From this moment on, you aren't students. You're the first meta-human insurgency. If you want Kaminari back, you have to stop thinking about arresting Robotnik. You have to start thinking about dismantling his empire, piece by agonizing piece. You need to integrate. Your quirks are incredible, but they're loud and they're predictable. You're going to learn how to fight like freedom fighters. The next 48 hours were a blur of grueling asymmetric warfare training. Duke, despite his injuries, took the lead alongside Sally and Sonic. He taught the students how to mask their thermal signatures with localized cooling, forcing Todoroki to maintain a precise low-level frost aura that didn't create visible mist. He taught Momo how to create non-standard ordnance, not just shields and cannons, but EMP mines and signal jammers modeled after G.I. Joe tech. Midoriya spent hours with Sally and Nicole, the handheld AI. He wasn't just studying quirks anymore. He was studying the infrastructure of Robotropolis. He learned about the Great Harmony, the central computer core that controlled every Swat-Bot on the planet. He realized that the city wasn't just a place. It was a living, breathing machine that required constant input. If we cut the power to the roboticizer vats, Midoriya whispered, his pen flying across the page of a new, darker notebook, the process stalls. But the backup generators are fueled by the Chaos Emeralds. We can't just break the machines. We have to disrupt the energy flow. Sonic watched the training from the rafters, his usual cocky grin replaced by a thoughtful frown. He saw the change in the kids. The hero brightness was fading, replaced by the grim, steel-eyed resolve of the resistance. Bakugo was working with Rotor to create howitzer bracers that used power ring energy to stabilize his explosions, allowing him to fire concentrated beams of heat without the recoil shattering his bones. They're getting harder, Sal, Sonic whispered to the princess, as they watched Kirishima test his hardening quirk against a high-frequency vibroblade Duke had provided. I don't know if I like it. They're supposed to be kids. They're survivors, Sonic, Sally replied, her eyes fixed on the map. And if they don't get harder, they'll end up like Bunny. Or worse. On the third night, a priority transmission broke through Knothole's dampening fields. It was a video file, encoded with the same biological signature as Kaminari's quirk. Duke gathered everyone around the main screen. The image flickered to life. It was a laboratory, pristine and terrifyingly white. In the center was a glass tube filled with yellow electricity. But it wasn't just power, it was screaming. Inside the tube, Kaminari was suspended by silver wires fused directly into his spine. His eyes were wide, glowing with a forced, blinding light. Standing in front of the tube was a new machine. It was humanoid, sleek, and painted in the gold and black of Kaminari's hero costume. Greetings, freedom fighters. Robotnik's voice purred from off-camera. Meet the first of my Paragon series. This is the Spark Unit. It possesses all of the boy's power, with none of his intellectual limitations. And the best part? It's powered by his own heartbeat. If you destroy the machine, you stop the heart. The machine raised its hand, and a bolt of black electricity shattered the camera lens, cutting the feed to static. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, a soft, metallic click echoed through the hub. It was Duke, chambering a round into his pulse rifle. "He thinks he's won because he's holding a knife to our friend's throat," Duke said, his voice as cold as the void between stars. He looked at Midoriya, who was no longer crying. The boy's face was a mask of emerald light, his hair floating as One for All surged at a level he had never reached before. "He thinks we'll hesitate," Midoriya said, his voice sounding like a chorus of echoes. "He thinks being a hero makes us weak." "He's about to find out," Duke finished, "that there is nothing more dangerous than a hero with nothing left to lose, and a soldier with a plan." "Sonic!" Sally snapped, her eyes ablaze. "Ready the cyclone. Duke, Class 1A, we're going to the city. We aren't raiding, we're invading." As the group moved toward the hidden launch bay, the great forest seemed to groan in anticipation. The metal rot was deep, but for the first time in a decade, a different kind of power was moving through the roots. It wasn't just chaos, it was justice, and it was coming for the heart of the machine. The zone of silence was a misnomer. It was not quiet. It was a rhythmic, mechanical graveyard, where the wind whistled through the rib cages of discarded buildings and the rusted hulls of civilian maglevs. This was the scorched earth perimeter surrounding Robotropolis, a 10-mile-wide ring of desolation designed to give Robotnik's sensors a clear line of sight on anything that breathed. In the center of a collapsed transit station, hidden beneath a lead-lined tarp, the forward strike team hunkered down. Duke stood at the edge of the rubble, his binoculars fixed on the distant, pulsing red lights of the city's atmospheric scrubbers. Behind him, the air hummed with a different frequency, a sharp, crystalline vibration that made the hair on everyone's arms stand up. Miles away from the safety of Knothole, Tails had set up a portable resonance chamber. In the center sat a single Chaos Emerald, its emerald-green facets glowing with an internal, sun-like intensity. Shoto Todoroki stood before it, his dual-colored hair fluttering in the invisible draft the gem created. "The math doesn't make sense, Shoto," Tails whispered, his twin tails twitching with scientific anxiety as he adjusted the dials on his handheld computer. "Quirks are biological. They're localized mutations of the human genome. Chaos energy is, well, it's the fundamental energy of the universe. It's supposed to be incompatible with organic limits, but when you're near it, your internal temperature isn't just rising, it's rewriting itself." Todoroki reached out, his left hand glowing with a low orange flame. As his fingers drew within an inch of the emerald, the flame didn't just grow, it changed color. The orange deepened into a violent solar white, and the temperature in the room plummeted and skyrocketed simultaneously. "It feels like my blood is turning into lightning," Todoroki said, his voice unusually strained. "The wall between my fire and ice, the balance I have to maintain, it's gone. It's just one force now. Chaos isn't just power, it's change," Duke said, turning away from the city. He walked over to the pair, his eyes scanning the glowing gem with a soldier's skepticism. "In my world, we've dealt with experimental power sources, energon, MASS devices. They always have a cost. If you use that thing to supercharge these kids, are they going to be able to turn it off? Or are we just building better bombs for Robotnik to scavenge?" "I don't know, Duke," Tails admitted, his young face etched with the weariness of a seasoned engineer. "But Sally's virus was only half the battle. Robotnik's new Paragon units, the ones built from Kaminari's data, they have internal dampeners. Our standard weapons won't touch them. We need a breakpoint, something that exceeds the machine's ability to calculate." Suddenly, the ground beneath the station vibrated. It wasn't an earthquake, it was a rhythmic subterranean thudding. "Incoming," Duke snapped, his pulse rifle coming up in a smooth, practiced motion. "Tails, shut that gem down. It's acting like a beacon." From the cracked asphalt of the old plaza, 3 tunneler bots erupted. Massive, drill-headed serpents of chrome and spinning blades. They were followed by a swarm of wasps, their stinger cannons already glowing with lethal intent. This wasn't a random patrol. This was a surgical strike. "Don't shut it down," Todoroki said, his voice ringing with a new, terrifying authority. "I can handle it." He didn't wait for Duke's command. Todoroki stepped into the emerald's aura and slammed both hands into the floor. The result was not a wall of ice or a wave of fire. It was a primordial surge. A jagged wave of frozen fire, crystals of ice that burned with a white-hot chemical intensity, tore through the plaza. The tunneler bots weren't just damaged, they were structurally deconstructed. The extreme thermal shock turned the reinforced alloy of their drills into brittle glass, which then shattered under the pressure of the expanding ice. The Wasp-Bots tried to bank away, but Todoroki pointed a finger at the sky. A bolt of frost-rimed plasma shot from his palm, tracking the machines with the precision of a heat-seeking missile. Upon impact, the machines didn't explode. They simply ceased to exist, evaporated in a flash of white light that left purple spots in Duke's vision. Todoroki fell to one knee, the white light receding from his eyes. His left sleeve was incinerated, and his right arm was covered in a thin, translucent layer of rime that didn't melt. He was breathing in heavy, ragged gasps, his skin shimmering with a pale, sickly glow. Todoroki! Midoriya was at his side in an instant, his hands hovering over his friend. Your pulse. It's off the charts. Tails, what happened? The emerald acted as a catalyst, Tails said, his fingers flying across his keyboard. It forced his quirk to bypass the biological safeties. Shoto, you just outputted more energy in 3 seconds than a nuclear reactor does in an hour. Your body, it's not meant to be a conduit for that much chaos. Duke stood over the wreckage of the serpent bots, his jaw set. He looked at the smoking remains, then at the city on the horizon. He saw the tactical advantage. Todoroki was now a god-tier weapon, but he also saw the cost. It's a double-edged sword, Duke muttered. He looked at Midoriya and Bakugo, who were staring at Todoroki with a mix of awe and fear. Robotnik knows we have the emerald now. He knows we have the power to break his toys. He's going to stop playing games. Good, Bakugo spat, though his voice lacked its usual bite. He looked at the emerald, then at his own grenade gauntlets. If half and half can do that, imagine what I can do with a little change in my sweat. No, Duke said, his voice a hammer blow of command. We don't use the emerald unless it's the final push. We don't trade your lives for a faster victory. We move tonight, under the cloak of the atmospheric scrubbers. We're going into the heart of Robotropolis. We're going to rescue Kaminari, and we're going to shut down the Great Harmony. Sally Acorn emerged from the shadows of the ruins, her handheld AI, Nicole, projecting a map of the city's ventilation shafts. Duke is right. The city's power grid is most vulnerable during the midnight shift change of the Swat-Bots. But we have a new problem. She pointed to a shimmering red dot moving toward their location from the city center. The Spark unit isn't waiting for us. It's being deployed to intercept, and it's not alone. It's leading a battalion of roboticized heroes, failed clones and processed captives from other sectors. Duke looked at Class 1A. They weren't the bright-eyed students who had fallen into the forest. They were hardened, ash-stained warriors, standing in a graveyard of their own making. Final gear check, Duke commanded. Momo, I want those EMP grenades distributed. Kirishima, you're the vanguard. If anything gets through the line, you harden and you hold. Midoriya, you're with me and Sonic. We're the scalpels. As the sun set over the zone of silence, casting long, jagged shadows across the dead world, the group began their march. The air grew colder, smelling of heavy metals and ozone. In the distance, the Great Harmony pulsed like a mechanical heart, a red beat that dictated the rhythm of a billion enslaved circuits. Duke walked at the head of the column, his pulse rifle held across his chest. He felt the weight of the 20 lives behind him. He wasn't just Duke of G.I. Joe anymore. He was the commander of a mythic rebellion, leading a pack of young gods into the belly of a mechanical beast. Stay sharp, Duke whispered into the comms. We're entering the belly of the whale, and we aren't leaving until we cut its heart out. Behind him, the green glow of the Chaos Emerald followed, a flickering light in a world of darkness, promising either salvation or a beautiful, blinding destruction. Robotropolis was not a city. It was an open wound on the surface of the planet, cauterized by neon and chrome. From the vantage point of the ventilation exhaust at the edge of the industrial zone, the world looked like a sprawling circuit board of obsidian skyscrapers and rivers of liquid waste. The sky was a permanent, bruised purple, choked by the black smoke of 1,000 furnaces. This was the Great Harmony that Dr. Robotnik had promised. A world where the messy, unpredictable heartbeat of life had been replaced by the cold, unwavering logic of the machine. To the students of Class 1A, it was a vision of a future they were sworn to prevent. To Duke, it was the ultimate occupied territory. Sensors are dead, Duke whispered into his comms, his back pressed against the warm, vibrating metal of a massive conduit. Sally, Nicole, Give me the overlay. Where's the primary uplink for the spark unit? The unit is being housed in the eye of the storm, Commander, Sally's voice crackled, filtered through heavy encryption. It's a high-security spire at the center of the Great Harmony core. Robotnik is using Kaminari's bioelectricity to stabilize the entire city's power grid. He isn't just a prisoner, he's the battery. Distraction team, status report, Duke commanded. We're in position, Sarge. Sonic's voice was a low hum of kinetic energy. He was perched on top of a hovering surveillance drone 3 sectors away, with Bakugo and Kirishima crouched beside him. The Oil Ocean refinery is right below us. One spark, and this whole district turns into a very bright, very loud 4th of July. Do it, Duke said. Go loud. The night didn't just break, it detonated. From the center of the industrial zone, a pillar of orange fire screamed into the purple sky. Bakugo hadn't just used a howitzer impact, he had utilized the specialized power ring gauntlets Rotor had forged to ignite the volatile chemical waste of the refinery. The explosion was so intense it rattled the windows of the Eye of the Storm miles away. Instantly, the rhythmic red pulse of the city shifted to a frantic, stuttering blink. Thousands of Swat-Bots began to pivot, their logic processors prioritizing the fire suppression and containment of the blue blur, who was already tearing through their ranks at Mach 2. Team B, move, Duke ordered. Duke, Midoriya, Todoroki, and Momo Yaoyorozu slipped into the shadows of the maintenance tunnels. They moved with a predatory silence. Duke had spent the last week hammering into them. They weren't jumping into the fray with hero shouts. They were moving through the blind spots of the cameras, using Momo's synthesized signal jammers to create ghosts in the city's surveillance network. As they neared the base of the central spire, the air became thick with a familiar, terrifying ozone. The hallway ahead was lined with glass tubes, each one containing a partially roboticized Mobian. But these weren't standard units. They were being fused with strange, glowing components. Synthetic muscle fibers that mimicked the density of Kirishima's hardening or the tensile strength of Tsuyu's tongue. He's been harvesting more than just Kaminari, Midoriya whispered, his hand trembling as he touched the glass of a tube containing a creature that looked like a grotesque fusion of a wolf and a mechanical tank. He's been collecting data from every encounter we've had since we landed. He's building an ecosystem of meta-badniks. Don't look at the cages, Midoriya, Duke said, his voice a steel file. Look at the objective. If we stop the core, the cage is open. If we stop to cry now, we all end up in those tubes. Suddenly, the heavy blast doors at the end of the corridor hissed open. Out stepped the spark unit. Up close, the machine was even more harrowing. It stood 7 feet tall, its chassis a matte black with jagged gold lightning bolts etched into the armor. Through the translucent visor of its faceplate, they could see the flickering, tortured eyes of Denki Kaminari. The boy's hair was gone, replaced by a crown of copper electrodes that hissed with black sparks. Target identified, the machine spoke, its voice a digital distortion of Kaminari's cheerful tone. Class 1A. Status: obsolete. Objective: harvest. The machine didn't move like a robot. It moved like a lightning strike. In a microsecond, it was in the center of the group, a discharge of 10 million volts erupting from its frame. Todoroki reacted instantly, throwing up a wall of supercooled ice to insulate the group. But the black electricity didn't just strike the ice, it shattered it on a molecular level. The force of the blast sent Duke and Momo slamming into the walls. "Kaminari-kun, stop!" Midoriya yelled, green lightning dancing around his body as he engaged 20% full cowl. He caught the machine's fist mid-swing, the impact creating a shockwave that cracked the floor. "It's us! It's Izuku! You have to fight the programming!" The spark unit's head tilted with a sickening mechanical click. Logic error. Friendship is a non-quantifiable variable. Resuming execution. The machine's other hand transformed into a high-frequency blade, glowing with electrical heat. It lunged for Midoriya's throat, but a pulse rifle blast from Duke caught it in the shoulder, staggering the metal giant. "Momo, the EMP!" Duke roared, sliding across the floor to retrieve his discarded weapon. Momo Yaoyorozu didn't hesitate. She had been printing a specialized, high-yield electromagnetic pulse device since they entered the spire. She slammed the device onto the floor and triggered it. A wave of invisible energy rippled through the hallway. The lights flickered and died. The ventilation fans ground to a halt. The spark unit froze. its golden eyes dimming to a dull orange. Is it over? Momo gasped, her skin pale from the effort of creating such a complex machine so quickly. No, Duke said, his tactical instincts screaming. Look at the cables. The heavy black power lines fused into the spark unit's back were still glowing. The machine wasn't powered by an internal battery. It was a direct extension of the Great Harmony. The EMP had shut down its primary processors, but the city was already rebooting the unit, pumping massive amounts of chaos-infused electricity back into its frame. The spark unit's eyes flared back to life, now a burning, malevolent red. It grabbed the EMP device and crushed it in one hand like a soda can. Calculated probability of success 0, the machine droned. Maybe your math is right. A new voice echoed through the hallway. Sonic the Hedgehog landed on top of a dangling light fixture, his fur glowing with a faint, blue aura. Behind him, Bakugo and Kirishima emerged from the smoke of the stairwell, looking battered but triumphant. But you forgot one thing, Sparky. We're not just variables. We're the guys who are going to turn you back into a human. Bakugo roared, his palms vibrating with a terrifying muffled heat. Step aside, Deku. I'm going to short-circuit this oversized toaster. Wait, Midoriya held out a hand. Duke, the Chaos Emerald. If Todoroki can channel the resonance like he did in the forest, we can create a feedback loop. We don't destroy the machine. We overload the connection to the city. We drown the Great Harmony in more power than it can process. Duke looked at the spark unit, then at the terrified, glowing eyes of the boy trapped inside. It was a gamble. If they failed, they would incinerate Kaminari along with the Spire. But if they did nothing, Robotnik would finish the hero bots, and the world would fall. Todoroki, Duke said, his voice steady. Do it. Everyone else, provide cover. Don't let those cables stay connected. We're cutting the cord. As Todoroki stepped forward, the Chaos Emerald in his satchel began to scream, its green light turning the hallway into a vision of emerald fire. The final battle for the soul of Class 1A had begun in the very heart of the machine. The Eye of the Storm groaned as the Chaos Emerald's resonance began to vibrate the very atoms of the spire. Shoto Todoroki stood at the center of the hurricane, his body a conduit for a power that should have disintegrated any organic being. One half of his form was encased in an ice so dense it pulsed with the emerald light of the gem. The other was a pillar of white-hot solar flare that didn't just burn the air, it erased it. Beside him, Duke held his position, his boots braced against a service grate that was rapidly glowing cherry red. The commander wasn't watching the light, he was watching the spark unit. He saw the way the machine's black lightning was beginning to arc toward Todoroki, drawn like a moth to a stellar forge. Bakugo, Midoriya, stay on the cables! Duke's voice was a bark that cut through the electrical scream of the room. If those lines stay fused to the floor, the Great Harmony will just keep dumping power into him until the boy inside is cooked. We have to isolate him. Bakugo didn't need the prompt. He was a blur of orange and black, his new power ring gauntlets stabilizing the nitro sweat on his palms into concentrated lances of heat. He slammed into the floor beside the spark unit, his explosions tuned to a high-frequency vibration. I know, soldier boy. Quit the yapping, Bakugo roared, his eyes wide with a manic, focused rage. He wasn't just blasting, he was sawing through the reinforced carbon fiber cables with rhythmic, shaped charges. Each explosion was a surgical strike, peeling away the layers of Robotnik's engineering. But the spark unit wasn't passive. As the connection to the city flickered, the machine's internal logic shifted from harvest to exterminate. It lunged at Bakugo, its hand transforming into a jagged, electrified blade. Midoriya intercepted it in a flash of emerald lightning, his fingers digging into the machine's wrist. Kaminari-kun, look at me. Midoriya's voice was strained, the veins in his neck bulging as he pushed 45% of One For All into his arms. I know you're in there. The Denki Kaminari I know wouldn't let a machine take his soul. Fight it! Break the cycle! The spark unit's visor flickered. For a heartbeat, the red light dimmed, replaced by the familiar, terrified gold of Kaminari's eyes. A single, static-filled word escaped the machine's vocal synthesizer. I can't. It hurts. Then let it hurt. Bakugo's voice was surprisingly devoid of its usual mocking tone. He had reached the final cable, his hands trembling with the heat of a continuous detonation. Take that pain and shove it down the Allfather's throat. You're a hero, you idiot. You don't take orders from a toaster. With a final earth-shaking blast, Bakugo severed the last umbilical line. The spark unit stumbled, its primary power source severed. But in that moment, the great harmony, the sentient city itself, reacted. The walls of the spire began to shift, the floor plates rising like the teeth of a giant beast. Robotnik's voice flooded the room, amplified by 1,000 hidden speakers. A valiant effort, Commander Hauser. But you forget, I have studied the concept of rage for decades. It is a predictable chemical reaction. Your students believe their anger makes them strong. In reality, it makes them easy to map. Suddenly, the spark unit's armor began to expand. It wasn't just Kaminari's power anymore. The machine was drawing from the stored data of the other students. It vibrated with the speed of Ida, its metallic skin hardened with the density of Kirishima, and its forearm shifted into a heavy cannon that mirrored Momo's construction. This was the Paragon in its true form, a mechanical god built from the fragments of Class 1A's potential. He's mimicking all of us, Todoroki gasped, the green light of the emerald starting to bleed into his eyes. Duke, the resonance. It's not enough. The machine is adapting faster than the emerald can overload it. Duke looked at the spark unit as it prepared to fire a concentrated beam of black lightning, Ida speed kinetic force, and Bakugo tier heat. He looked at his students, exhausted, overtaxed, and on the verge of losing their friend forever. This was the moment he had feared. This was the moment where the hero mindset would break under the weight of a war that didn't care about their morals. Sonic, Duke said, his voice terrifyingly calm. Get the kids behind Todoroki's ice. Now. Duke? What are you doing? Sonic asked, skidding to a halt. I'm showing this machine the one thing it can't calculate, Duke replied. He reached into his tactical vest and pulled out a small, black cylinder. It was a G.I. Joe neural spike, an experimental piece of tech meant to fry the electronics of an entire command center. It was also a suicide device if detonated at close range. I'm showing it the cost of an order. Duke didn't run. He walked toward the spark unit, his pistol empty, his rifle broken. The machine leveled its multi-quirk cannon at him, the red lights of its processors spinning at a furious rate. Calculated outcome of current path, 100% casualty for organic unit Duke, the machine droned. Your math is perfect, Duke said, stopping 5 feet from the machine, but you forgot to carry the one. Duke jammed the neural spike into the machine's exposed chest cavity, the gap Bakugo had blasted open earlier. At the same moment, he slammed his fist into the spike's trigger. The result was an agonizing scream of white noise. A massive, blue electrical discharge erupted from the spike, arcing through Duke's body and into the spark unit. The machine's mimicry logic went into a feedback loop. It tried to harden, to phase, to speed up, and to explode all at once. The conflicting signals tore the chassis apart from the inside out. Now Shoto, Duke roared, the electricity charring his tactical gloves. Give it everything. Todoroki let out a primal scream, releasing the full, unmitigated power of the chaos-supercharged emerald. A wave of emerald and white fire engulfed the room. The spark unit didn't explode. It disintegrated. The metal armor was vaporized, turned into a fine silver mist that coated the walls. In the center of the blast, a small, limp figure fell toward the floor. Midoriya caught him. Denki Kaminari was unconscious, his skin pale and his hair singed, but his heart was beating. The electrodes had been burned away, leaving only shallow scars. Duke collapsed to his knees, his hands smoking, his vision swimming in a sea of gray. He looked up as the great harmony began to stutter, the red lights of the city turning a frantic, dying orange. The spire was falling. We did it, Uraraka whispered, cradling Kaminari's head. We haven't done anything yet, Duke rasped, coughing up a mouthful of metallic-tasting soot. He looked at the ceiling as a massive, egg-shaped shadow descended through the opening they had made. The boss just got home. Above them, the ultimate manifestation of Robotnik's madness began to unfold. A mechanical titan, 300 feet tall, and fueled by the remaining 6 Chaos Emeralds, lowered its massive clawed hand toward the spire. This wasn't a machine, it was a god of iron and ego. You have destroyed my masterpiece, Robotnik's voice echoed, now coming from the Titan itself. So I shall destroy your world, starting with the students who dared to dream of freedom. Duke struggled to his feet. leaning on his pulse rifle as a crutch. He looked at Sonic, then at the weary, battered heroes of Class 1A. They were at their limit. Their quirks were depleted, their commander was half dead, and the enemy was a mountain made of metal. "All right, kids," Duke said, a grim, bloody smile touching his lips. "You wanted to know what Plus Ultra really means? It means you stand up when your legs are broken. It means you fight when the math says you're dead. It means we finish this." As the Titan's fingers began to crush the top of the spire, the Chaos Emerald in Todoroki's hand began to pulse with a new, rhythmic light. It wasn't just responding to Shoto anymore. It was responding to all of them. The spire didn't just collapse. It shrieked as the Titan's fingers, each the size of a tenement building, shredded the structural steel like wet paper. Debris rained down. Glowing circuits, twisted rebar, and chunks of reinforced concrete, as the tower began to buckle toward the molten rivers of the lower industrial zone. "Everyone, move!" Sonic's voice was strained. No longer the playful chirps of a freedom fighter, but the desperate roar of a leader watching his world die. He scooped up the unconscious Kaminari and launched himself toward the crumbling stairwell, while Ida grabbed Uraraka and Tsuyu, using his recipro burst to jump the widening fissures in the floor. Duke, however, was already moving upward. He jammed his pulse rifle into a support beam to steady himself, staring up at the monolithic face of the Titan, peering through the hole in the ceiling. Robotnik's face, projected on a massive screen where the Titan's chest should have been, was a tapestry of unhinged, jubilant malice. "You are insects!" Robotnik's voice shook the very foundation of the tower. "You cling to the idea of heroism, while the tide of progress sweeps you into the furnace. Look at your pathetic, bleeding bodies. You are the past. We're the only future you've got," Midoriya shouted, his voice cracking but resolute. He didn't run away. He stood on the edge of a dangling floor plate, the green lightning around him coalescing into a single, blinding point of focus. "Todoroki, now! The emeralds are reacting to our quirks. They're not just batteries, they're keys." Shoto Todoroki stood in the center of the debris, his eyes a swirling nebula of emerald light. He didn't just have the one emerald anymore. The vibration of the Titan had caused the resonance to spike, pulling the latent energy from the city's power grid into the room. He held his hands out, his palms bleeding from the sheer intensity of the energy flow. "Duke, if I release this, it'll level the district. I can't aim it. Don't aim it." Duke roared, pulling a secondary thermal charge from his vest. He looked at the Titan, then at the pulsating chest plate where Robotnik's core sat. "Focus it through the conduit. We don't need a precision strike. We need a short circuit." The Titan's hand descended again, a wall of crushing alloy aimed directly at the center of the spire. Bakugo vaulted over a falling piece of steel, his gauntlets smoking as he diverted the Titan's attention with a barrage of point-blank explosions to the machine's thumb joint. "Hey, you oversized tin can, over here! Come and get a taste of the real thing." Robotnik took the bait. The Titan's head swiveled, its optic sensor focusing on Bakugo. A massive cannon began to hum with a blue light, a concentrated chaos blast. "Midoriya, now!" Duke yelled. Midoriya slammed his hands onto the floor, anchoring the energy for Todoroki. Todoroki screamed, a sound of absolute, agonizing release. The Chaos Emeralds, saturated by the student's own life force, erupted in a beam of pure, prismatic reality. It wasn't just ice or fire, it was the raw, unadulterated energy of the universe, channeled through the desperate, singular will of Class 1A. The beam tore through the spire, punching through the Titan's hand and slamming into its chest plate. The sound was not an explosion. It was the sound of a world correcting a mistake. The Titan's chassis, made of the strongest alloys in the Mobian galaxy, began to crystallize, then fracture, then turn to dust. Robotnik's laughter turned into a high-pitched, digital shriek as the Great Harmony's grid inverted. The chaos energy was infectious. It tore through the Titan's circuits, jumping from the machine to the city's infrastructure. Lights across the horizon exploded, transformers blew out, and the red pulse of the city vanished, replaced by the chaotic, beautiful flicker of dying machinery. The Titan collapsed, its mass falling away from the tower, its head hitting the industrial zone with a sound like a mountain range falling into the sea. The shockwave knocked the entire Class 1A off their feet, sending them tumbling through the debris of the crumbling tower. Duke didn't stop. He scrambled through the wreckage, his hands raw, his tactical vest hanging by a thread. He found them in the crater of the lower floor. His students, battered and broken, but alive. Kaminari was still breathing, the rhythmic beep of his recovery mask, the only sound in the sudden, deafening quiet. But the silence was short-lived. From the smoke of the Titan's remains, a small, black, egg-shaped ship ejected. It wasn't the Titan. It was a lifeboat, and it was fleeing toward the distant, frozen wastes of the north. "He's getting away," Midoriya whispered, looking up at the departing ship. His body was limp, his quirk completely exhausted. "We stopped the city, but he's still alive." Duke hauled himself up, leaning against a piece of twisted titanium. He watched the ship vanish into the clouds. He felt a bone-deep exhaustion, the kind that came from knowing a war wasn't won, only paused. But then he looked at his students. They weren't looking at the sky with defeat. They were looking at each other. They were looking at Kaminari. They were looking at their own hands, which were still glowing with the faint, residual sparks of their powers. "He's alive," Duke agreed, his voice heavy with the grim realization of what came next. "But look around you." The city was dark. For the first time in years, the horizon wasn't glowing with the artificial red of Robotnik's machines. It was dark, silent, and for the first time, it was free. The Flickies, freed from the central core, began to pour out of the vents of the fallen spire in a literal cloud of life, filling the air with the sound of wings. "We didn't kill the devil," Duke said, wiping blood from his eyes, "but we just took his sword away. This is our world now. Until he comes back, we build something worth defending." Bakugo stood up, his arm hanging limp, his face a mask of soot. He looked at the wreckage of the Titan, then at the city, then at the freedom fighters who were emerging from the shadows of the ruins, their eyes wide with disbelief. "We're not heroes today," Bakugo muttered, his voice quiet. "Today, we're just soldiers who survived." Duke looked at the sky, where the stars were finally beginning to pierce through the dissipating smog. He knew the cost of this victory. He knew the trauma that would follow them back to their own world, if they ever found a way home. But for now, he saw the spark in their eyes. A spark that was no longer just the power of a quirk, but the ironclad resolve of those who had looked into the heart of a machine and decided that life was worth the fight. The great harmony was dead. In its place was a silence so absolute it felt like a physical weight against the eardrums. As the dust of the fallen Titans settled over the ruins of the industrial zone, the bruised purple of the Mobian sky began to bleed into the pale, uncertain gray of a true dawn. Thousands of flickies and other small woodland spirits swirled in the air, their chirping providing a frantic, melodic eulogy for the mechanical nightmare that had occupied this land for a decade. Among the jagged remains of the Eye of the Storm, the survivors of the meta-human insurgency began the long, agonizing process of counting the cost. Duke sat on the edge of a shattered support beam, his legs dangling over a drop that led into the cooling vats of the chemical sector. He was a wreck of a man. His tactical vest was little more than scorched webbing, his skin was a map of electrical burns and soot-clotted gashes, and his left arm was strapped to his chest in a makeshift sling of hero costume fabric. He watched as Momo Yaoyorozu and Tails worked side by side, using a combination of 3D printing quirks and salvaged Fox tech to build stabilizing cradles for the hundreds of half-roboticized Mobians they had pulled from the wreckage. There was no joy in the work, only a grim mechanical necessity. "He's awake," a voice said. Duke turned his head slowly. Izuku Midoriya stood behind him. The boy, no, Duke realized, the warrior, looked fundamentally different. The vibrant green of his costume was stained a dull, permanent olive, and his eyes, once wide with the idealism of a student, now held the 1,000-yard stare of a veteran. Midoriya sat down beside Duke, his hands resting on his knees. They were scarred, the skin mottled from the sheer output of the final chaos clash. "Kaminari-kun is talking," Midoriya continued, his voice low. "He doesn't remember much. He says it felt like being underwater in a room made of needles. But he's laughing. He tried to make a joke about the hospital food, even though we're eating survival rations. Laughter is a defense mechanism," Duke said, staring out at the horizon. "It's how the mind convinces itself the world isn't still screaming. Let him laugh. He earned it. We all did, I think," Midoriya said. He looked at Duke, a question hovering in his gaze. "What happens now, Commander? The city is dark, the Titan is scrap, and Sally says the resistance cells across the planet are rising up because the central uplink is dead. But Robotnik, he's still out there, and we're still here. We don't even know if the rift can be reopened." Duke reached into his pocket and pulled out a single, crushed cigarette he'd been saving since the chemical plant. He didn't light it, he just turned it over in his fingers. "In my world, we have a saying, the mission changes, but the war remains. We took the capital, we broke the machine. But a man like Robotnik doesn't just go away, he's like a virus. He'll find a new host, a new frozen wasteland, a new way to turn life into logic. The difference is, this world knows he can bleed now. You gave them that. You gave them the myth of the God-Slayers." As if on cue, a blue streak skidded to a halt on the platform. Sonic the Hedgehog didn't have his usual smirk. He looked at the two humans, then at the sprawling graveyard of his home. He leaned against a piece of twisted titanium, his chest heaving. "Sally's setting up the provisional government in the ruins of the old palace," Sonic said. "She wants you both there. She says the people need to see the giants who fell from the sky." "We're not giants, Sonic," Midoriya said softly. "We're just kids who didn't want to see our friend turned into a battery. Whatever you call yourselves, you changed the math," Sonic replied, looking at Midoriya with a profound, newfound respect. "I've spent years running circles around these bots, but I never thought I'd see the day the Great Harmony actually went silent. You didn't just fight, you broke the rhythm. My world owes you a debt that can't be paid in power rings." The days that followed were a blur of reconstruction and revelation. Class 1A, led by Ida and Momo's organizational genius, became the architects of a new Mobius. Kirishima and Sato used their strength to clear the miles of debris, while Todoroki and Asui worked to purify the poisoned water tables of the industrial zone. They weren't fighting villains, they were fighting the aftermath of tyranny. Duke took on the role he knew best, the instructor. He worked with the freedom fighters, Bunny, Antoine, and Rotor, to turn their guerrilla tactics into a formal planetary defense force. He taught them interlocking fields of fire, signal encryption, and the harsh reality of military logistics. He was preparing them for the day Robotnik returned, because as a Joe, he knew that peace was only the time between battles. On the final night of the first month of liberation, the group gathered at the site of the original rift in the Great Forest. Tails and Momo had spent weeks analyzing the residual chaos signatures, and a shimmering, unstable gateway had begun to form between the ancient oaks. It was a bridge back to UA, back to Japan, and back to a world that didn't know the taste of oil in its reign. "It's time," Sally Acorn said, standing at the head of the assembled freedom fighters. She looked at Class 1A, her eyes shimmering. "The portal won't stay open long. If you're going, it has to be now." One by one, the students stepped forward. Uraraka, Jiro, Tokoyami. They all shared final embraces with the Mobians they had fought beside. When it came to Bakugo, he simply nodded at Sonic, a silent acknowledgement between two forces of nature. Kaminari, supported by Kirishima, looked at the mechanical arm of Bunny Rabbit and promised to never take his own heartbeat for granted again. Midoriya stood at the threshold, looking back at Duke. "Are you coming, Commander? G.I. Joe must be looking for you." Duke looked at the portal, then at the vast, rebuilding world of Mobius. He saw the scars on the land, and he saw the flicker of red lights on the far northern horizon, a sign that the machine was already trying to restart. "My war is wherever the enemy is, son," Duke said, his voice firm. "Robotnik is still on this board, and I'm the only one here who knows how to track a man who thinks like a general. I'm staying until the job is done. Tell the Joes, tell them I'm holding the line." Midoriya nodded, a single tear escaping his eye. He snapped a crisp, military salute, the one Duke had taught him in the trenches of Robotropolis. Duke returned it, standing tall despite his broken body. "Plus Ultra, Commander," Midoriya whispered. "Go home, hero," Duke replied. With a final surge of emerald light, Class 1A stepped into the rift. The forest roared, the violet energy swirling into a pinpoint before vanishing entirely, leaving only the scent of ozone and the quiet rustle of leaves. Duke stood alone in the clearing for a long moment. Then he heard the soft click of a mechanical footstep behind him. Sonic was there, spinning a single power ring on his finger. "So, Sarge," Sonic said, the smirk finally returning to his face. "You heard the reports from the north? Something big and round just started building a factory in the ice." Duke checked the magazine of his pulse rifle, his eyes narrowing as he looked toward the horizon. The students were gone, and the myth was over, but the war was just beginning. Then stop talking, Hedgehog, Duke grunted, chambering around. We've got work to do. Conclusion. The liberation of Robotropolis was not the end of the war for Mobius, but it was the end of the world's silence. The departure of Class 1A left a legacy that would be etched into the histories of the freedom fighters for generations. The tale of the meta-insurgency, the young gods who bled so that others might breathe. While the students returned to UA forever changed, bearing the psychological scars of a conflict that no training exercise could ever simulate, they carried with them the tactical wisdom of a soldier and the kinetic spirit of a rebel. In the frozen wastes of the north, Dr. Robotnik watched the flickering screens of his new base, his mechanical fingers drumming a rhythmic, vengeful beat. He had lost his city, his titan, and his prize, but he had gained something more valuable, a blueprint for the quirk factor. And in the great forest, the man known as Duke watched the stars, a lone guardian at the edge of a multiverse. He knew that the cycle of vengeance and industry was far from broken, but as long as there was a line to be held, he would be the one holding it. The legend of the hero and the soldier had only just begun.